The fundraising that happens doesn't go to the candidates. It actually goes to help get the message out from the campaign. And when I go to someone and say, I'd like to have your help to be able to get the message out, they can make a decision on who they believe in and what they're going to do. So transparency is extremely important. We have that. People can look online and they can see every donor of every possibility out there in the race, and I think that's entirely appropriate. But I do not like the thought of silencing political speech.
Thank you. Senator?
Thank you. If, in fact, the cost of running a campaign is 10 times the cost or 10 times the amount of the salary that I would expect to receive, I'm on minimum wage. We are a grassroots campaign. Votes are the only things that trump dollars. We have enjoyed traveling the state in my car, using gasoline, paying food for my helpers, paying for food. But I believe that the cost of a campaign should not outweigh the value of the campaign. And what we have today with decisions like Citizens United, where untold amounts of cash are being funneled into campaigns by private corporations in ways that influence policymakers to make decisions that are not always in the best interest of the people. I think those are the concerns that we're really speaking to when we're talking about campaign finance and the need for campaign finance reform. We know that court hearing, that decision has been upheld, but we know that it doesn't leave us in any better place when it comes to how we fund our campaigns and how we get our message out to people. I appreciate this opportunity to talk to the students of Oklahoma State University and those who are watching us online. This is one of the free opportunities, and I'm very appreciative for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. And State Senator, this next question, we'll start with you. It deals with the Islamic State. With airstrikes taking place in Syria and in Iraq, should Congress vote on an authorization of military action? If so, how would you vote?
I believe that's a conversation that needs to be had. This ongoing crisis in the Middle East, in fact, the 240 skirmishes that have occurred in the world since World War II are an example, and the United States has been involved in all of them. Those are examples of wars that are basically founded and based in religious issues. And we keep trying to put a political and a military solution on a religious situation. And we can see that it continues and it's not being very successful. I would definitely take a long, hard look at whether we send our troops into harm's way again into situations that we've not been able to resolve because of the nature of those situations. I think that vote has been taken, and I think Mr. Lankford voted in support of it. I think there is some alternatives, though. I think the United States needs to look more at peaceful resolutions and get our house in order in terms of how we're spending money for things overseas versus how we're spending money on our soldiers when they come home. This is the big challenge for me in sending people to war. We have to be prepared for when they come back, or we don't need to get into those wars in the first place.
Thank you. Congressman?
Yeah, the Islamic State is not under the previous authorization for the use of military force. In 2001, Congress voted to approve execution of military force for those directly connected to the September 11th, 2001 attacks. The president now is saying that he still has authorization to move into Syria based on that authorization from Al-Qaeda and for those directly connected to September 11, 2001. He doesn't. That is not an accurate use of military force. And the 2002 authorization for the use of military force was directly connected to Iraq. He is moving forces into this. Now, the issue is, this is something that Congress has to resolve. This is the way our system was set up. Federalist Paper 69 is very specific. And as you go back to the Federalist Papers, you'll be able to determine all these different amendments and all this different language, where did it come from? Federalist 69 is a really good one to be able to look at. It defines out the power and shows how different war power is from the previous King of England. So the King of England could actually call up his army and then go execute the army and go work out and be able to have the war. Said the President of the United States won't have that same authority. The President of the United States can't just call up the army and then be Commander-in-Chief. He is Commander-in-Chief after Congress has approved that. The reason that was put in there was specifically so the American people, we would be engaged in that conversation. When we feel threatened, when we understand that there's a real threat, then the American people, through their elected representatives, would say to the President, it's time for us to engage. We're willing to put our sons and daughters at risk. So yes, The president absolutely should come back to Congress for that. That debate needs to happen. I've already spoke on that on the House floor.
Very good. Well, thank you. Congressman, this next question deals with Ebola. It's kind of in our backyard. Texas Governor Rick Perry is calling on federal officials to implement screening procedures at all U.S. points of entry. Screeners would take the temperature of travelers and conduct other assessments to determine their overall health. If elected to the Senate, would you support those moves?
Yeah, we already have procedures in place, and the president is actually doing a decent job of trying to do some changes in that process. What needs to happen right now is we need to verify everyone coming from West Africa. And we need to determine, did they have contact, and not just assume. Right now we're asking the question, did you have contact with someone with Ebola? Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't. The gentleman in Texas that's right now struggling for his life, he was fully aware that he had contact with someone from Ebola, and he lied on his form coming through. So the first check needs to be not just, hey, tell us the truth. It needs to be verifying every individual that comes from that region. We talk about one person in the United States right now that's struggling with Ebola. That's a dramatic thing for us. But realize right now in West Africa, around 7,500 people right now have Ebola, and their system is completely overwhelmed. CDC estimates by the time we get to January of this year, there may be as many as 500,000 people in West Africa. So while we take this very seriously in the lives that are here, we need to take Ebola seriously and understand that there are people halfway across the world that are in real desperate need of engagement. This disease will spread if the United States doesn't engage. There's no other place in the world that's better equipped than we are to deal with this disease. And it would be wrong for us as a nation to back up and say we're going to just allow 500,000 people to die in West Africa because we don't want to engage because we're afraid. We should lean in to be able to help. We are equipped to do that, but we should also pay attention to ports of entry to make sure that we're verifying when people come from that district, we are doing some basic screening.
Thank you. State Senator?
I believe this is, in fact, the most dire world health issue of our time. And it was just a matter of time before it came to America. But I agree with the congressman that the majority of these cases are centered in West Africa. But with our highly mobile society of today, people travel from Africa to China, to Japan, to New England. And those areas are just as likely and just as capable of exposure as any other place in the world. I think a comprehensive system for our ports would cover anyone who comes from overseas. I think the method of screening is non-invasive. I think that everybody who would get screened, similar to how we're screened now to go through the airports, I don't think anyone would consider it a hassle. I think it is something that we all as citizens of the world have to be committed to, and until we can get this virus under control, I don't think any measure is too extreme. Screening in and of itself is not a difficult process. It is one that is available. It is one that can be instituted immediately. And I think it's one that people don't mind having to go through.
Thank you. And this question, we will start with you as well, State Senator. Marriage equality. This debate is coming on the heels of the Supreme Court decision to reject lower court appeals overturning the ban of same-sex marriage in 5 states, including Oklahoma. There are still more than 20 states, however, that ban same-sex marriage. Now, if my wife and I moved to a state another state, our marriage would be recognized. However, if a same-sex couple moves to a state that doesn't recognize same-sex marriage, they will not be considered married. Should Congress step in and make same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states, or should we leave this to the states?
And I'm very pleased that this debate comes on the heels of that no decision. I was celebrated yesterday with my friends in Oklahoma who are of different gender orientation. I understand their challenges. I understand them as humans, though, first and foremost. And how are we to treat human beings differently from the way we would like to be treated? This whole question of same-sex marriage was voted on in Oklahoma 10 years ago. And since that time, our demographics have changed substantially to the extent that I think people who choose to do and are differently oriented in their gender, they have the same rights as those of us who are oriented the way we are. I don't think there should be an opportunity for states to decide. I think that just like interstate commerce. We ought to be able to have that freedom to go from state to state, and people be able to keep their values, their principles, their lifestyles intact without unnecessary governmental interference. I believe that if the United States were to take on that issue, I think it would be a useful discussion for us to have in Congress. Because again, at the state level, we only have 5 states so far. But I think that attitude is changing as our states grow older, as our nation becomes more mature. And I think we have a basic duty to respect humanity.
Thank you very much. Congressman Lankford.
Every person's created in the image of God. Every person. Every person has value and worth. But the United States Constitution clearly leaves that authority to make decisions for marriage to the states. And I would say it's clearly because it's clear from the 10th Amendment that all things not addressed in the Constitution are reserved to the states. Now, it's not just my opinion on that. You can go back through 200 years of Supreme Court history, and over again, when any issue on marriage came up, the Supreme Court said that is a state issue, that's not a federal government issue. The federal government and Congress should not be engaged in the marriage issue at all. If I go back as recently as last year, the Supreme Court last year in the Defense of Marriage Act hearing that occurred, when their final piece came out saying the federal government can't get involved in this argument, did page after page in their opinion saying this is a state issue. This is a state issue. States alone can make the decision about marriage and about how to define marriage. And what's interesting was yesterday the Supreme Court said we're not going to hear a case, and basically their interpretation was either states make the decision or a single federal judge in a state can make that decision. They literally conflicted against their own argument from just a year ago in their own opinions. And if you read through the opinions and see what happened yesterday versus what they did last year, it is amazing to me the separation between the two on it. This is uniquely a state issue. Now, individuals are to be respected, and there's no question, I've talked about it before, I believe marriage and a traditional marriage between a man and a woman. I think that is the definition of marriage we've had as a nation and that we should maintain. But the states should make the decision on this, not the federal government.
Thank you, Congressman. This question comes back to you, Congressman. Dealing with veterans, the decision to send U.S. troops into hostile situations can and should be a difficult one. But the debate over how to care for those troops when they return from war, for many, is simple. Serve your country and receive the needed support when you return home. Multiple reports have highlighted deficiencies in veteran services. Do you support increased funding for veteran health care, education, and housing?
Yeah, let's start with just the basics on this. What I support is the veteran being able to make a decision where they actually go for health care. Right now, they don't have that capability. It's incredibly frustrating to me. It's something I've talked about for 4 years, and I'm not alone. Multiple others continue to bring up this same issue. If a veteran is in Woodward, Oklahoma, why do they need to drive to a veteran center to be able to get health care in Oklahoma City or drive to Tulsa or wherever it may be? Why would they need to drive past 5 or 6 really good hospitals on the way? Their family has to make that trip. Sometimes they have to leave very early, come get in line at the VA center to be able to go through the process. And so they're leaving out from their home at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're sick already. That's not right. That doesn't treat them with absolute respect. So the first thing that you need to do is not look at just the finance side of it, is to be able to look at the process issues. Allow veterans to choose where they go for health care rather than be forced into certain locations to be able to get health care and health care decisions. This past year, we actually